On New Year's Eve, in a bustling restaurant filled with laughter and light, a powerful yet lonely CEO sits at a table for one, hidden behind polished success and years of silence. But when a little girl with candy-sticky fingers and a fearless heart asks, "Do you want to eat with us?" a single question cracks open a life built on isolation. What begins as a quiet dinner invitation becomes a journey of rediscovery, healing, and unexpected family in the most ordinary of places. Sometimes all it takes to change everything is a seat at the right table. The city was bracing itself for celebration. The streets below teemed with people clutching shopping bags, champagne bottles, and armfuls of last-minute party supplies. Laughter floated upward, distant and disconnected from the silence in the 48th floor corner office of Smith Tech's global headquarters. Alexander Smith sat motionless behind his sprawling mahogany desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him framed a breathtaking panorama of Manhattan, dotted with glittering lights like a sky turned upside down. From here, everything looked neat, orderly, controlled. Just like his life, at least from the outside. The office was immaculate. Not a file out of place. Not a coffee stain in sight. The shelves held leather-bound books more for aesthetic than reference. A minimalist painting, a dark blue canvas with a single white slash, hung above a long credenza, the only art he allowed. Cold, modern, expensive. Like everything else he touched. The digital clock on his desk blinked 5:32 p.m. The building was nearly empty now. The receptionist had left at 4, giving him a gentle, "Happy New Year, Mr. Smith," as she clutched her purse, her excitement thinly veiled. He nodded politely, as he always did, then let the door swing shut behind her. He didn't tell her he would stay late. He didn't need to. Everyone knew Alexander Smith never left early. Not on holidays, not on weekends, not even during blizzards. Work wasn't a job to him, it was a fortress. But tonight, even the fortress felt hollow. He picked up his glass tumbler and swirled the remaining scotch at the bottom. It was smooth, aged, unfulfilling. Like everything these days. There were photos in his drawer, he knew that. Ones he hadn't looked at in years. His mother, young and laughing. His father, always tired from the night shift at the docks, but proud. A dog, Rufus, that he'd had as a teenager, who died while Alexander was at his first college internship. He kept them hidden. Not because he didn't care, but because remembering hurt more than forgetting. The only visible photo in his office was the one the board insisted he place. Him shaking hands with the president at a climate summit. It made headlines. Investors cheered. His stock rose. But not one person had called him that night to say they were proud. He reached for his phone and opened his contact list. Pages and pages of names. COOs, VPs, foreign dignitaries, Fortune 500 execs. But no one he could call to say, "Want to grab dinner?" Not without scheduling 2 weeks in advance and drafting a meeting agenda. The quiet was deafening. Alexander stood and walked to the window. Far below, yellow cabs swerved around each other like frantic ants. Somewhere, confetti cannons were being loaded. Couples were planning kisses. Children were staying up late for the one night they were allowed. And he would be alone. He ran a hand through his head and sighed, a sound so rarely heard from his own lips that it startled him. He wasn't working. Not really. He hadn't answered an email in over an hour. He was just lingering. Avoiding. The idea of spending New Year's Eve alone in his penthouse, with its museum-quiet rooms and sterile decor, made his chest tighten. He grabbed his coat. It was cashmere, custom-tailored in Milan, and meaningless. He didn't want the high-end rooftop bars or the sterile hotel lounges that served oysters on mirrored trays. He needed something else. Something he hadn't had in years. Something real. After a quick Google search, he called a small French restaurant in a Brooklyn neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. Louvre. The name sounded familiar. Perhaps someone had mentioned it at a board dinner years ago. They had a table by the window, the hostess said. Would he be joining others? No, he answered. Just me. A soft chime jingled as the door of Louvre opened. Alexander stepped inside and was immediately enveloped by warmth. The kind that didn't just come from heaters or firelight, but from human voices, real food, and the weight of familiarity. The place was modest, even a little cramped, but there was life here. Children giggled over coloring books. Old couples leaned toward each other with practiced intimacy, and waiters weaved through tables with practiced grace, balancing trays of steaming dishes and flickering candles. The maitre d', a young woman with tightly coiled hair and a soft French accent, approached him with a practiced smile that flickered when she realized he wasn't accompanied. "Bonsoir, monsieur. A table for one?" she asked, with the delicate hesitance of someone used to reservations for 2 or more on New Year's Eve. Alexander nodded. "Yes. Smith. I called earlier." She glanced at the small reservation list by the host's stand and nodded. "Yes, of course. Right this way." He followed her through the maze of laughter and shared plates, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored charcoal coat. The clink of silverware and soft piano music filled the room, interrupted now and then by the occasional burst of celebration. Someone toasting an engagement, a group of friends taking selfies. It was like watching a language he had once spoken but had forgotten long ago. His table was tucked into a corner by a large frosted window. Outside, snow flurried in gentle spirals under a streetlight, casting soft shadows across the restaurant floor. A candle flickered in a tiny glass holder, catching the gold in his cufflinks. A white cloth napkin lay folded like origami. "Would you like a wine menu?" the hostess asked, trying not to make her tone sound pitying. He nodded, removed his coat, and sat down. "Yes, please. Whatever red pears with lamb." She nodded and left with a silent grace, leaving him alone at the table for one. He sat still for a long moment, just listening, not to any one voice, but to the overall murmur of warmth around him. The kind of background music life made when people weren't trying to impress each other. It was raw, unscripted, and beautiful. A server came by, poured water into his glass, and placed a menu in front of him. "Will anyone be joining you?" the server asked politely. Alexander shook his head. "Just me." The waiter offered a practiced smile and left him in peace. He opened the menu, though he barely looked at it. His eyes skimmed the dishes, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in memories. He remembered sitting at the family table when he was 10, his mother humming as she brought in her famous roast duck, his father insisting on lighting a real fire even if it made the house too warm. He remembered the tinny sound of the old clock striking midnight, the kisses on the cheek, the sparkling cider. How safe it all had felt. How distant it all seemed now. His wine arrived. He sipped it slowly. The flavor was bold, earthy, full-bodied. It filled the senses but not the soul. He looked around again. A boy at a nearby table made a mess of his spaghetti, his father laughing as he wiped sauce from the child's cheek. A young couple exchanged presents across the table, giddy and awkward. And across from him, nothing. Just his reflection in the glass, framed by city lights and falling snow. He picked up his fork, sliced into the lamb, and chewed without tasting. He wasn't hungry. Not really. But eating gave his hands something to do. A family walked in, mother and daughter. The little girl bounced excitedly, her mittens dangling from her coat sleeves. They passed by his table as they were being seated at the far end. The girl looked up at him, her eyes lingering just a second too long. He returned to his wine. Time passed unnoticed. Outside, a group of teenagers lit sparklers and ran down the sidewalk, their laughter muffled through the glass. And then, without warning, the child was back, standing at the edge of his table, her boots slightly wet, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She held a candy cane in her gloved hand and looked at him as though she'd just spotted something the grown-ups missed. Her voice came out soft but clear, without hesitation. "Do you want to eat with us?" Alexander blinked. He wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" The girl didn't repeat herself immediately. She tilted her head and glanced at his plate, then at the empty chairs around him. "We have extra seats," she added matter of fact. "And Mama says no one should eat alone on New Year's." He turned his head slowly, unsure whether this was a joke or a misunderstanding. But behind the girl stood her mother, mid-30s maybe, with gentle eyes and a hint of surprise on her face. Not embarrassment, not pity, just openness. She smiled faintly and stepped forward. I'm sorry, I hope she's not bothering. No, Alexander said, his voice quieter than he expected. She's not. The child still waited, still looking up at him with those bright, earnest eyes. She wasn't asking because she thought he needed help. She was asking because she saw him, saw that he was alone. He glanced at the empty table again, then back at them. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. May I? The woman nodded. We'd love that. And just like that, something shifted. Not outside, not in the world, but inside the man who had built an empire and sat at its summit, only to find himself starving for something he couldn't buy. Something he had just been offered unconditionally by a girl with candy cane breath and a heart big enough to seat a stranger. The table was round, slightly wobbly at the leg, with a chipped ceramic salt shaker in the center and a flickering votive candle nearly burned down. It wasn't glamorous, not like the polished veneer of corporate banquets Alexander was used to, but it was alive. He eased into the empty chair, trying not to overthink it, trying not to look like a guest at someone else's holiday. The girl, Haley, plopped into the seat beside him with the easy confidence only children seem to have. She swung her legs beneath the table, still too short to touch the ground. Mommy made the rice, Haley declared, already tearing into a buttered roll. And Grandma made the tamales. But Mommy made the rice because Grandma always puts in too much garlic. And garlic makes my tongue burn. Across the table, Jasmine gave a light laugh. Her voice was warm, textured, grounded. Only because you eat it like it's pudding. Alexander smiled, setting down his napkin. Sounds like a dangerous way to eat rice. You don't know the half of it, Jasmine said, shaking her head playfully. I find grains in her backpack weeks later. He chuckled, a short, uncertain sound that surprised even himself. He picked up his fork, watching them, the rhythm between mother and daughter like a language he hadn't heard in years. A language of shared looks, invisible rules, history. I'm Alex, he said after a moment, catching Jasmine's eye. Thank you for letting me join you. I wasn't expecting this. Jasmine gave a soft nod. I'm Jasmine, and I'm guessing you don't do this sort of thing often. He looked at her, then down at his plate. No, I don't. Good, Haley piped up. Then this is special. The food was simple but delicious. Tender tamales wrapped in fragrant corn husks, seasoned rice, plantains caramelized just enough to stick to your teeth, and a bowl of black beans with onions and lime. The smells were comforting, nostalgic in a way Alexander couldn't quite place. He'd had food like this once, years ago, at a friend's house in college. He had almost forgotten the power of a home-cooked meal. So, Jasmine said gently, her fork idly swirling rice, do you always spend New Year's alone? The question was asked without judgment. It landed softly, like a question that already knew the answer. Alexander took a sip of his wine, then looked toward the window where the snow continued to fall, slow and steady. I didn't used to, he said eventually. His voice was quieter now, carrying something older, something worn. But over time, things changed. I built my company. Hours turned into years. People drifted. I told myself I didn't mind. Jasmine listened, not interrupting. I guess I thought success would fill the rest of the spaces, he added, almost to himself. But it doesn't. It just makes the walls nicer. For a few moments, there was only the clatter of cutlery and the quiet jazz trickling from the overhead speakers. Then Haley, unaware of the weight of adult conversation, reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of crayons and a folded paper menu. I'm drawing fireworks, she said, sliding the paper across the table to Alexander. You can color with me, but only if you use red. Red is for the good ones. He accepted the crayon like it was a sacred object. Red it is. Jasmine smiled at the exchange, and something flickered in her gaze. Not curiosity anymore, but recognition. The kind you feel when you meet someone who has been quietly carrying something heavy for a very long time. You must have had someone, she said after a moment. A family. Once. I did, Alexander answered softly. I was raised by good people. Working class. We didn't have much, but New Year's was always special. My mother would make roast chicken with herbs she grew in the window box. My dad would stay up with me to watch the ball drop, even if he had a shift in the morning. And what happened to them? Jasmine asked, gently enough that it didn't sting. He looked at the candle's tiny flame and swallowed. Gone. Years ago. Car accident. Right after my first product launch. Jasmine's breath caught slightly, and her eyes dropped to her plate. I'm sorry. He nodded. After that, I buried myself in work. Not because I had to, because it was the only thing that didn't ask me to feel. The words came easier than he expected. Maybe it was the food, or the quiet understanding in Jasmine's face. Or maybe it was Haley, innocent, loud, free of pretense, reminding him of something he'd lost. Jasmine rested her elbows on the table and leaned forward slightly, her chin in her hand. And now, Alexander looked around their modest table, at the small mismatched plates, the nearly empty basket of bread, at the girl sitting next to him, who had drawn a purple explosion over his red fireworks. Now, he said slowly, a breath escaping him, now I realize it's been a very long time since someone just offered me a seat. Jasmine didn't say anything right away, but she reached out gently and touched the back of his hand, just once. No pressure, no expectation, a moment of simple human connection. You're welcome here, Alex, she said. He looked at her, his voice almost catching. Thank you. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO or a lonely man in a fine coat. He just felt human, seen, known, and seated at a table where he wasn't expected to be anything else. The atmosphere in Louvre began to shift as the final hour of the year arrived. It was subtle at first, the tempo of conversation quickening, glasses refilling with more intention, the soft background jazz replaced by a live trio in the corner. An upright bass thrummed steadily beneath a slow, smoky trumpet. Overhead, paper lanterns swayed ever so slightly in the wake of passing servers. Someone laughed so hard at a joke, they nearly dropped their dessert. Haley had abandoned her coloring for now, her energy building like a coil tightening inside her small frame. She was perched on her knees on the chair, eyes darting from the restaurant clock to the bar where a line of champagne flutes waited on a tray, catching light like rows of crystal soldiers. Almost time, she chirped. Almost. Alexander found himself smiling. Not the polite kind he wore at conferences or in shareholder meetings, but something looser, quieter. The kind that happened when you weren't watching for it. Jasmine caught him watching her daughter and leaned closer, her voice low so Haley wouldn't overhear. She's convinced the fireworks can hear her wishes, she said with a hint of a smile. Is that so? Alexander replied, sipping what remained of his wine. And do they listen? Jasmine tilted her head thoughtfully. You'd be surprised how many of them come true. There was a pause between them. Not awkward, but full, pregnant with unspoken questions, shared glances, and the odd intimacy that arrives when two people unexpectedly understand each other. Do you make a wish at midnight? Jasmine asked after a moment, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Alexander looked at his hands. He thought about boardroom resolutions, annual earnings projections, productivity goals, the cold, calculated wishes that had structured his life for decades. No, he said. Not for a long time. Jasmine nodded. Maybe it's time you did. The restaurant lights dimmed just slightly, enough to cast a golden hue over every face. Servers glided through the aisles now, delivering champagne and sparkling cider. Each flute caught the soft flicker of candles, creating constellations of glass on every table. At theirs, Haley had 2 plastic champagne flutes in front of her. One filled with apple cider, the other with orange juice, just in case, she'd insisted. Jasmine received hers with a thank you. Alexander hesitated as the server set his down. The flute was cool in his hand. The bubbles rose quickly to the top, dancing in nervous spirals. And then, 10, someone shouted. The entire restaurant joined in. 9, Haley gasped in delight, her cheeks glowing with excitement. 8. Jasmine leaned in slightly, close enough for him to smell the faint floral of her perfume. Her eyes sparkled, not with spectacle but with presence. 7. Alexander looked around at the crowded room. Not at the food, the decor, or the noise, but at the people. 6. At a woman wiping her eyes as her partner kissed her cheek. 5. At a group of teenagers taking selfies and laughing so hard they fell into one another. 4. At a little girl, her face lifted to the ceiling like it might rain magic. 3. At a mother who had reached across time and silence and offered him a seat. 2. At a version of himself, still sitting at a table for one, slowly fading. 1. Happy New Year. The restaurant erupted into cheers and clapping. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone popped a confetti cannon near the bar. A baby cried in confusion, and everyone laughed. Haley blew on a paper horn so enthusiastically that the end crumpled. "We made it," she shouted. Jasmine turned toward Alexander and gently kissed her daughter's forehead, her eyes soft with maternal warmth. Then she looked at him, direct, searching, kind. "Happy New Year, Alex," she said, her voice just loud enough for him to hear over the noise. He swallowed and met her gaze. It wasn't a line or a courtesy or a phrase tossed out into the air. It meant something from her. It had weight. "Happy New Year, Jasmine." Their glasses touched lightly. He didn't even sip. Just held it there, suspended between them, feeling the fizz and heat of something unfamiliar. Hope, maybe. Haley reached across and tugged on his sleeve. "Did you make your wish?" Alexander looked down at her, then to Jasmine, and then out the window at the snowfall softening the sharp edges of the city. He exhaled. "I think I did," he said softly. And for the first time in many, many years, he wasn't watching the celebration like an outsider looking through the glass. He was in it, in the moment, and it mattered. Not because it was a new year, but because it was his new beginning. Morning light spilled through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse, cold and bright and merciless. The city outside was blanketed in a soft, slushy gray, the kind of snow that had been beautiful the night before but was now just a nuisance. Yellow cabs carved paths through icy streets. Pedestrians moved slower than usual. Even the horns of impatient drivers sounded muffled by the lingering hangover of celebration. But inside the penthouse, it was silent. No coffee machine humming. No classical music playing softly in the background. No voice. No footsteps. Alexander stood barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, still in the same black slacks and white shirt from the night before. His jacket lay across the back of a chair, forgotten. The top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, his tie tossed carelessly on a nearby armrest. He held a small, folded piece of paper in his hand. The paper was creased and slightly sticky at one corner, as if it had once been tucked into a child's coat pocket alongside a half-eaten peppermint. He had found it that morning while reaching into his jacket for his phone. It had fluttered out and landed face down on the rug. At first, he thought it was a receipt or someone's dropped note. Then he saw the crude purple crayon marks along the edge, the kind of marks that didn't try to stay inside any lines. He turned it over slowly. On the front was a drawing. 3 stick figures. One tall, one medium, and one very small. They were all holding hands beneath a sky of fireworks, each colorful burst exploding into stars, spirals, and squiggles. The tallest figure had gray hair and a square jaw, just like him. The smallest one had pigtails and an oversized candy cane. The medium one had long hair and a curved line for a smile. They were standing together in front of a table. It was unmistakable. His table. Their table. Drawn with fat brown lines and mismatched chairs. A small candle was scribbled in the middle, yellow and flickering. At the bottom of the page, in shaky, oversized letters, were the words, "Thank you for sitting with US." A warmth bloomed in his chest so suddenly it startled him. He turned the page over. Written neatly, this time in a woman's hand, was a note. A short one. Sometimes the soul just needs a chair pulled out for it. "Thank you for sitting with us. Jasmine." Alexander stood still. The city rumbled around him as it always had, horns honking, subways clattering beneath the surface. But something inside him had gone quiet in the most extraordinary way. No one had written him a note like this in decades. He walked slowly to the kitchen counter and set the drawing down with the same care one might give a rare artifact. He looked at it again, then sat down on one of the leather stools that lined the marble island. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said thank you to him like that, not for a donation or a keynote speech or a business merger, but simply for being there. The digital clock on the stovetop read 9:11 a.m. His phone buzzed on the counter next to him. 4 missed emails, a flagged report from his finance team, and a notification from his assistant asking if he was ready for the 10 a.m. investor call. He stared at the screen. Then slowly, deliberately, he picked up the phone and called her. "Cancel everything for today," he said. His voice was calm. Steady. A pause. His assistant caught off guard. "Sir? I said cancel everything," he repeated. "No meetings. No calls. No rescheduling. Just cancel it." Another pause. "Understood, Mr. Smith." He ended the call, set the phone down, and looked again at the drawing, at the red and yellow explosions in the sky, at the smiling stick figures, at the warmth he had almost forgotten he was capable of feeling. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a doorway, a tug at the thread of something deeper, something real. He leaned forward, tracing the stick figures lightly with his fingertip, and made a quiet decision. One that didn't come from a spreadsheet or a quarterly plan. He needed to see them again. Not for business. Not for charity. Not because he was lonely, but because something in him had been offered kindness, and it had dared to believe it wasn't too late to return it. He rose from the stool and went to the coat rack by the door. His breath fogged lightly as he pulled on his scarf and gloves. The penthouse, once a monument to solitude, now felt too large, too quiet, too full of echoes. He locked the door behind him, folded the drawing carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, right over his heart. Then he stepped into the elevator. Downward. Into the world. Into something new. Brooklyn was colder than he remembered. Alexander stepped out of the town car and zipped his coat up to his chin, his breath rising in soft clouds around him. The driver offered to wait, but he shook his head. "No, thank you. I won't be long." He said it without knowing if it was true. The sidewalk was still wet with thawed snow, and the morning sun was working hard to burn through the haze. The school stood at the corner, a low-slung brick building with faded blue paint around the windows and a hand-lettered sign near the main entrance. East 84 Community School. There were murals on the side wall, painted by children, no doubt, depicting sunflowers, rockets, books, and handprints in every imaginable color. He stood for a long minute, unsure what to do with his hands, unsure what he was even doing here. He hadn't made an appointment. He hadn't sent a polite email in advance. He'd just shown up. That in itself felt foreign. A group of children burst through the front doors, escorted by a young teacher. They scattered like wind-blown leaves across the yard, heading toward buses and waiting parents. Laughter and shouts filled the cold air. Alexander scanned the crowd, half hoping, half fearing she might be there. Then, through the glass doors, he saw her. Jasmine. She was walking slowly down the corridor, clipboard in hand, wrapped in a dark green scarf that matched the streaks in the mural. She wasn't hurrying. She wasn't performing. She looked content. Tired in the way that working mothers often are, but grounded. Solid. For a moment, Alexander hesitated. The part of him trained to retreat, to measure, to strategize, whispered to leave. That he didn't belong here. That this, whatever this was, wasn't his life. But the drawing still rested in his coat pocket, folded like a quiet promise. He took a step forward. As she exited the building, she saw him almost instantly. Her eyes widened in surprise, her steps slowing, but she didn't freeze. She didn't turn away. She walked toward him. "Alex." Her voice held cautious warmth, but no suspicion. "Hi," he said, unsure how to begin. I wasn't sure if you'd be here. I mean, I figured you would. You said you teach, and..." She laughed softly, holding up her clipboard. Guilty. There was a pause. Long enough to feel it, but not long enough to regret anything. I found the drawing, he said, carefully pulling it from his coat and unfolding it. And your note. Her expression softened. Ah, Haley's masterpiece. She's talented, he said, meaning it. Jasmine smiled. She'll be thrilled you liked it. He took a breath. It meant more than you know. Another pause. I wasn't sure if I'd see you again, she admitted. I wasn't sure if I'd let myself try, he said quietly. Her eyes searched his, looking not for excuses but for truth. What made you come? He looked around. At the children. The mural. The school breathing with life. And then back to her. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen, he said. Not as a title or a number. Just as a person. That hasn't happened in a long time. Jasmine's voice was calm. We all get lost sometimes. He nodded. I've been lost for years. But something about that dinner, your kindness, Haley's honesty, it cut through all of it. I didn't know how much I needed it. She tilted her head, considering. So what now? Alexander smiled, tentatively, honestly. Now, I was hoping I could return the favor. Maybe take you both to dinner. A real one. No surprise guests. I'll make a reservation and everything. Jasmine chuckled. Are you offering to pull out a chair this time? Absolutely, he said. Even two. She looked at him a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Okay. And just like that, the door that had been cracked open the night before widened by another inch. Over the next few weeks, dinners became regular. Tuesdays mostly. Sometimes Fridays. Always casual. Always honest. He learned that Jasmine was a history teacher, fiercely protective of her students and wildly passionate about underfunded schools. She spoke about her work like it was sacred. He admired that. Admired her. He also learned that Haley could name every planet in the solar system, had memorized 3 Beyoncé songs, and had once tried to sell her Halloween candy to neighbors for a fundraiser she invented on the spot. Alexander brought himself. Not his company. Not his wallet. Just himself. He listened. He laughed. He failed often at Monopoly Junior. And slowly, without pomp or fanfare, he began to soften. The suits became less tailored. The calls shorter. He found joy in small things. A shared look across a dinner table. The sound of Haley humming to herself. Jasmine's hand brushing his on the sofa. He wasn't fixing them. And they weren't fixing him. They were simply becoming. Snowflakes drifted through the air like ash from some quiet, celestial fire, soft and slow and without urgency. The windows of Louvre glowed warm against the gray-blue cold of the street, their panes frosted at the corners like old postcards. Candles flickered inside. The faint sound of a violin leaked through the glass. It was December 31st again. But this time, Alexander Smith wasn't alone. He stepped out of the car wearing a deep navy wool coat, scarf wrapped neatly at his throat. His stride was relaxed. No briefcase, no phone in his hand, no schedule pressing against the edges of his thoughts. As he opened the door, the chime above rang just as it had a year ago, but the man who walked in now carried a different kind of silence. Not the hollow quiet of absence, but the stillness of presence. Behind him, Jasmine entered, bundled in a burgundy coat and holding a tiny bouquet of winter berries she'd picked up from a street vendor. Her eyes caught his for a second, smiling, grounded. And just behind her, Haley burst through the door in a flurry of scarves and mittened hands. It smells the same, she announced loudly. They still have cinnamon in the candles. A few heads turned. A couple near the bar smiled at the child's declaration. A server recognized them instantly and approached with a soft grin. Welcome back, Mr. Smith, she said, then turned to the others. And welcome, ladies. Your table is ready. Thank you, Alexander replied, his voice light, with the faintest note of reverence, as if the table were a small chapel in a quiet church. They were led through the familiar maze of tables, past clinking glasses and murmured toasts, to the same spot by the window. The table had been set for 3. Alexander let his hand rest lightly on the back of the chair as the others sat. For just a second, he looked at the room the way he had a year ago, at all the laughter, the shared moments, the small intimacies that had once felt like a world he was locked out of. Now he was part of it. Jasmine unwrapped her scarf and reached across the table to fix Haley's unruly hair. Haley didn't notice. She was too busy unfolding her napkin and examining the dessert menu first. For strategy, she claimed. The waiter came by with menus and water. Jasmine glanced up. "We'll have the tamales again if you're serving them." "We remember," the waiter said. "The kitchen's ready." Alexander watched them with a soft, amused quiet. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something folded and worn, the edges beginning to fray. He set it on the table beside the candle. Haley's eyes widened. "You still have it." The drawing, her drawing, still colored in red and purple and gold, with fireworks above their heads and 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sky of light. "I keep it in my coat," Alexander said. "Every day." Jasmine looked at him, and for a moment, something tender passed between them. No words, no need. Just the knowledge of what had grown between then and now. The hours passed with comfort. Dishes were shared. Wine was poured. Jasmine told a story about her students organizing a last-minute toy drive, and Haley spent 15 uninterrupted minutes explaining why Pluto deserved to still be a planet. Alexander didn't check his phone once. As the final minutes of the year ticked toward midnight, the restaurant dimmed again, just like before. Glasses were refilled. Napkins straightened. A hush of anticipation fell across the room like the moment before a snowfall. "Ready?" Jasmine asked. He nodded. The countdown began. 10. Haley stood on her chair again, holding her cider flute high, eyes dancing. 9. Alexander glanced around at the restaurant, at families, lovers, friends, and felt none of the distance he'd once carried like a second skin. 8. Jasmine's hand slipped into his. He didn't need to look to know it was there. 7. 6. 5. Haley began bouncing in place. A waiter tried to hand her a paper horn, but she waved it away with the serious focus of a general commanding a fireworks brigade. 4. 3. Alexander leaned slightly toward Jasmine. "Thank you," he whispered. She looked up, her lips already curled into a knowing smile. 2. 1. Happy New Year. Glasses clinked. Cheers rang out. Confetti flew like sparks above every table. Strangers kissed. Friends embraced. Jasmine leaned in and kissed Alexander. Slow, sure, just long enough to say everything that hadn't been said aloud. When she pulled away, he was still smiling. "Best New Year's yet," she said. "Best life decision I ever made," he replied. Haley raised her glass and shouted, "To fireworks that listen to wishes." Alexander lifted his. "To girls brave enough to ask lonely men to dinner." Their glasses met in a perfect chime. Outside, the snow began again, soft and endless. Inside, the table by the window glowed with candlelight, laughter, and the quiet miracle of 3 lives, once strangers, now gathered not by accident, but by choice. And as the new year opened its door, Alexander knew something with absolute certainty. This was home. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.